Hi, I'm Jess McIntosh. I have been working in politics for 20 years. My first cycle was in 2004, and I was like absolutely floored to realize that that meant this year is my 20th year of doing this. And let me tell you, things have gotten considerably weirder than when I started, because I really enjoyed watching The West Wing and I thought government sounded neat. We're dealing with some different issues than I expected to be at that point. But I'm thrilled to still be here. The fight could not possibly be more important. I have worked at every level of politics, from school board races to United States president. Yes, West Wing is responsible, I think, for a lot of people my age who work in politics getting into politics. Um, and I know that a lot of you are new to these conversations. A lot of you have been having these conversations already, and now you have a space to learn a little bit more about how to do it. My background is in communications. As Julie said, I have also been a CNN commentator. I had the only feminist drive time morning show on radio anywhere for 5 years, which was Signal Boost, that I hosted with Zerlina Maxwell. So for the last few years, I have been focused very much on how we reach the audiences that we need. You know, if we have the best ideas and the things that we're doing actually help people and help kids and make better schools, why is it hard? You know, how can we have these conversations in the most productive way possible? So I was thrilled when Red Wine and Blue decided to partner up with another organization that I work very closely with, Advocates for Youth, which writes a lot of the best sex ed curriculum that we see in schools today and hosts sex ed trainings here. You'll see me doing that at a later date, I think in a couple of months. The two groups partnered together to do some very serious research into how we talk about combating the parents' rights fight. And you'll notice that I call it the parents' rights fight. And that's because the other side has done an excellent job of branding it. And so that is the catch-all term that gets used in the media, in normal everyday life, for the attacks on our schools, frankly, the book bans, the anti US history, anti-LGBTQ stuff, the attacks on trans kids, all of that catch-all, basically anything Moms for Liberty is going to do when they show up in your neighborhood, that gets loaded under this parents' rights fight rubric. So what we did was try to figure out what's the best way to have conversations with folks about that. All right, everybody, let's get going. Okay, so usually I present with Diana from Advocates for Youth. Today it's just me, so I get to wear both hats. But I do work with both organizations, and it's always nice when your friends are friends with your friends. So that's how we got this research done. The purpose is to figure out how to educate and persuade and mobilize people against these harmful parents' rights attacks. We have all seen what they've done to our communities, and we want to make sure that it doesn't get any worse, that we can roll some of that back. This is the great team that did the actual research. Perry Undum is the firm. They're sort of the like gold standard in anything that's gender or sexuality based. And since so much of this winds up in that gender spectrum, they were the right people to get into it. Absolutely. I'm going to get to like pull back the curtain a little bit on how polling works in politics. We have two ways of doing it. This might be very familiar to some of you, so sorry if I'm giving you information that you already know. But for those of you who don't and maybe thought the West Wing was neat and like learning about this stuff, you got qualitative data and you got quantitative data. Qualitative data is your subjective, like open-ended questions. This is focus groups, right? These are people getting together to talk about the idea. So you'll see certain pieces of language, certain ideas floated throughout this presentation that came from the qualitative research. That means real people with real reactions. Quantitative research is probably what you think of when you think of polling. It's somebody calling, asking a series of questions, you know, registering the answers. Are you more or less likely to support something if X? And you really, if you want to get a full picture, you have to do both. And so we did both. So we will get to see, you can see here, you know, it was 2,319 adults in total. You can see the breakdown racial. This is a good group. This is enough of a data set to tell us what we need to know. So the most important thing is that a majority of the public doesn't know much about the parents' rights fight. They have not heard a lot about it. That means both that we have the opportunity to talk to them, but also that the other side does too. So 58% of the respondents are vulnerable to the opposition's parents' rights narrative. They think it sounds all right. It sounds plausible. That ends when they start learning about what it is, which makes your conversations about it so important. Otherwise, if they just hear what Moms for Liberty is saying, it sounds too reasonable. Because of course, they're not being truthful about what it actually is. This is where you come in. So a little bit about our audiences before we get into the actual messaging, because it's interesting. They didn't fall into our normal categorizations. About a third of the audience that we tested are in our base, right? These are the people that we want to be talking to. About a third are in the middle, and about a third we call our opposition. These are people who we're never going to get. There is a subset of each of those that can simply not be persuaded to take action no matter what you do. There's part of the opposition that's like that. There's some of us that are like that, and there's some in the middle that are like that. There's no racial or ethnic group that is a monolith here. Everybody is spread across every category, and women, including moderate women, fall into every single segment. So you can see this arranged here. In the base, you've got your primed and ready folks, right? Those are the people who, with the right messaging, are ready to take action on this. They're ready to protect kids. Then you've got your aligned immovables. They're not going to take action. They agree with you. They're just not going to do anything about it. And I'm sure that you've encountered a few people like this in your life. They do exist. But we're going to focus on the primed and ready. We're also going to look at that middle section because that persuadable activists, we need them too. Then you've got your disengaged moderates. Again, they couldn't care less. They're not going to do anything about it. And in your opposition, you even have your disengaged opposition. They believe that we should be banning books. They're just simply never going to show up at a school board to say that. So, like I said, the two segments that we're interested in are primed and ready and persuadable activists. So the primed and ready is like, probably everybody on this call would fall into that section. If you're already here, if you want to learn about this, you're probably primed and ready. You can probably figure out which of your friends fall into this category too. They don't need very much information. They just need a reminder about what's at stake, and they need direction. They don't know what to do about it. Interestingly, most of this group are not parents. So don't think that it is just your parent friends and the parents in your network that you need to be talking to. The majority of this group, it's nice, like I see myself in this, are not parents. They just care. Like, we cannot have kids and still care so very, very much that they have the education that they need and that they're not bullied and that they get to graduate into a world that's accepting of them and that they're ready for. Persuadable activists, basically, they're vulnerable to the parents' rights frame, but when you start talking about the policies that means are implemented, they are absolutely against it. So they need a little more information than the primed and ready group does, but honestly, not too much. They hold more liberal views on race. They might be a little more conservative on sexuality and gender. They might just not know that much. So we're going to talk about those two groups. Those are the people who you are looking for. Again, most people have not heard very much. That means there is space for extremists to get them, but there is space for you to get there first, using compassion and facts, using frames that resonate and educate. And so we're going to get into what those frames are. We pulled out some top themes from our research. Focus on youth impact, so many bans. The bans are about control and meeting parents where they are. I'm going to do a deep dive into each one of those, starting with focus on youth impact. So this sounds really obvious, right? Like focus on the impact to kids. But if you think about it, it's actually not that intuitive. You can tell from the opposition, right? They've called it the parents' rights fight. They're not focusing on the kids here. And very interestingly, one of the best indicators of whether you will be right-wing or more moderate or liberal is your approach to parenting. Our side tends to believe that parenting is about creating a safe and secure space for your kid to grow up and be themselves. It's about making them be the best self that they can be. It's about teaching them the things that they need in order to move around the world. That tends to be how our side defines parenting. The other side defines it very differently. It's about teaching kids obedience. It's about discipline. It's about them needing to learn to move in your world. This is the seen but not heard frame that so many of us were raised with. So the opposition uses parents' rights because that's what resonates with their target audience. But it does not resonate with ours. Ours really doesn't think of parenting as like the parents' rights. It's about the kids. So when you talk about this, you're going to talk about the impact that it has on kids. Most people are worried about kids' well-being and safety. The number one issue, this surprised the hell out of me. I really thought it was going to be like education funding or something, but the number one issue for parents across the board is bullying. So whenever you can talk about what these policies do to either keep kids safe from bullying or to make bullying more prevalent, that is a very, very good place to be in order to get somebody to listen to what you're saying. They also care a lot about getting a well-rounded education. And that's different than a quality education. People really want their kids to be exposed to all kinds of different viewpoints. They understand that this is a global 21st century world, and school is where kids are going to interact with people who don't look like them, who didn't grow up like them, who don't necessarily think like them. And they want that. They want a well-rounded education. So think about safety and think about a well-rounded education. Again, our audience is less concerned about how policies affect parents or how policies affect schools, mostly concerned about how they affect the kids. So keep it focused on what kids lose when they have to deal with this Moms for Liberty parents' rights fight coming to their town. So there are really two kinds of losses that we deal with here. The first category is that well-rounded education, right? Loss of all of these bullet points, by the way, come from the focus groups. So this is information that like parents gave us themselves about what they thought about these. Oh, I just did it myself. Not everybody is parents. These are the issues that Americans gave us themselves that they were concerned about. Loss of knowledge of history. Loss of access to high quality, well-rounded education, access to books, freedom to learn about the world and all who are in it, access to different perspectives and views. Kids lose all of this when a parents' rights agenda comes to their school. They have a risk of becoming narrow-minded, which is a concern that parents have if we allow censorship, if we allow book bans, if we stop teaching American history. And then on the other, the second bucket that they lose is that safety and protection. They're facing more bullying. Everybody understands that especially after pandemic, we are dealing with a mental health crisis among young people, and having more bullying and more discrimination in your schools only adds to it. So they lose that well-rounded education and they lose that sense of safety. So kids are losing basic rights, safety, access to the world, knowledge, history about like knowledge about their bodies, their history. These points are all excellent ways to sort of distill the two slides that I just went through into language. Teaching empathy is one of the ways our schools are working to reduce bullying, is a great way to talk about how and why schools are teaching about different kinds of families. It can be uncomfortable to learn about the dark aspects of our past, but kids need to learn our history so they don't repeat it, is a great way to talk about why it is important to talk about US history, why we can't ban books on the civil rights movement and slavery, why we can't ban books on Martin Luther King. It might be uncomfortable. It's okay to acknowledge that we don't necessarily like to hear about the awful things that America has done and is still doing. But if we don't teach kids about that, they're going to repeat it. That message actually really works with people. And then the bottom line, honestly, it's very hard to find somebody who disagrees with this. Schools should be a place where kids are safe, inspired, supported, and treated with dignity. And sometimes it's just really nice to remind people as we get into like the nitty gritty about that is what schools are actually there for. So Moving on to the second frame, so many bans. And the reason why I put it like this is because it's actually really important to talk about how many bans we're facing right now. Usually I'm a communications professional. I'm like, stop it with the laundry lists. Nobody wants to hear, 12 things when you can just say one value statement, do that. That's not true here. People actually do need to hear about the overwhelming volume. And the reason why is because when they hear all of it, they start to understand that it is a political agenda. This is not actually a grassroots movement against one particular book that parents found troubling. This is a nationwide right-wing political agenda that is being undertaken so that certain politicians can stay in power, even though their policies are very, very unpopular. So when you talk about how many bans there are, ban on lessons that teach empathy, banning schools from protecting gay kids from bullying, requiring bodily inspection and period tracking for all girls, that one is a particularly gross one. But if you're going to ban trans kids from sports, you're going to have to verify that in some way. And at least in Ohio, that's the way that they decided to do it. There are actually several states that track periods for girls in sports. Ohio was, I think, the only one that was talking about requiring bodily inspection. But make sure that that's in the list. We're banning empathy. We're banning bullying protections. We're requiring bodily inspection and period tracking. We're banning sex ed. We're banning books that deal with all kinds of things, but list them out: race, sex, gay issues, Anne Frank, Martin Luther King, LGBTQ kids who are struggling, the bans and censorship on how teachers talk about racism in US history. The volume really drives home that this is a political strategy. And that's what helps people who maybe have heard a little bit about it, but don't know very much and don't have an opinion one way or the other, understand what's really going on and why they need to get in the fight against it. So the bans are about control. And people are willing to, people understand that when they understand that the bans are a political strategy, because a strategy has a motivation behind it, right? You're doing it for a reason. And the reason here is control. Our audiences actually get that the policies are disingenuous. They question the political motivations behind them. They understand that the connective tissue is control. It's about control over people. That control is either rooted in religion or white supremacy or partisanship. It is about control over others. The second to control is political power. The more you can connect specific bans to each other or to the issues that the person you're talking to cares about, the more willing they are to take action. So these quotes at the bottom of this slide, again, those came from our focus groups. So as people are learning about what the policies are, they are saying things like, they want to impose their religious beliefs on everybody. They want to keep white supremacy. They want to divide people. They want to make you think like them. So if you tell people what is actually up, what the bans are actually doing, that's the conclusion that they come to, and they are correct. So again, this is a few good ways of putting into message practice what I just laid out in the last couple of slides. Note, since 2020, there have been over 1,700 book bans in the country. Like, that sheer number is really going to help people. Hundreds of new laws. If they have heard the phrase parents' rights, it's okay to say the folks pushing this agenda call it parents' rights, but it's a political strategy funded by far-right activists at the national level. And it's about dividing and controlling people. And then very simply, it's important to remind folks, a child's hormonal makeup or healthcare is not our business. This is between parents, their child, and their doctor. All young people, including transgender and non-binary students, deserve a safe environment where they can be themselves in peace. And I want to put a pin in that last sentence because it does something really interesting communications-wise. If you want to get really nerdy and Google this, it's called the race-class narrative. And it was developed to figure out how to make white people more receptive to the idea that certain things needed to be done for historically marginalized communities in order to make things more equal. White people are not necessarily receptive to that message. Consider the fight over affirmative action, right? So the race class narrative said that the way to do this is to phrase it so that you are including the group of marginalized people in all people. So if I'm talking to another white person about the need for affirmative action, I might say something like, all kids, no matter what race they are, deserve a fair chance to go to college. I might say, every kid graduating from high school, whether they're Black or white, deserves to know that their application is going to be taken seriously. So you see what I'm doing there? I'm starting with all of us, and then I'm mentioning the marginalized group that is most impacted by this and bringing it back to all of us. So that's just a little bit of a communications trick. If you're having a hard time getting through to somebody, reminding them that the people who are most effective are in fact mostly just like us. And they also deserve the rights and protections that the person you're talking to enjoys. It's sad that we need these, but we do for now, and so we make the most of them whenever we find a good and productive one. Meet parents where they are. It is very important to acknowledge that parents are confused. Parents are scared. It is a hard and scary time to be a parent. Like, society is changing so fast. Technology is changing so fast. Bans and censorship are not the way to create a safe environment to address parents' fears for their kids. But understand that, like, their concerns are valid. If somebody is concerned about what's being taught at school, meet them there. It's okay to say, yeah, yes, of course, it is a very concerning time to be a parent. Let's talk about it, right? So meet parents where they are. We're going to talk about trans issues a little bit, because that seems to be the flashpoint, more or less, at this moment for the parents' rights agenda. It has not always been. I'm old enough to remember when wearing masks was the flashpoint for this particular group. And if you've ever wondered why the anti-mask fight looked exactly like the anti-CRT fight, looks exactly like the anti-trans fight today, it's because it's the same people, the same funding, the same groups. When we talk about this being a national right-wing political strategy, we mean it. It is the same actors. So they just flip from issue to issue to issue. They're not actually trying to change anybody's mind here. They're trying to gain political power. So they see salience now in attacking trans kids, so that's what they're doing. So let's talk about how to talk about trans issues, because that's probably where your conversations are going to be largely centered. There is an enormous education gap here. Like, the vast majority of Americans do not know a trans person. They don't really understand what being a trans person is. They couldn't tell you what that experience is like. They don't really know what gender affirming care means. There's just a huge education gap. However, that does not mean that people want to see trans people discriminated against or trans kids bullied. They just don't. We see over and over again that these policies are very unpopular with people who do not understand the issue. And I kind of love that about us. It means that, like, when we don't understand you, our first instinct is not to fear you. It's to know more. I think the other side, when they don't understand something, they fear it, and they assume that everybody works like them. But luckily, we don't. In fact, the two main questions that our audience had about trans youth is, how and when did they know? And how can we support them? Like, that's not a fear-based response right there. But these are not people who feel well educated on gender issues. They're just normal human beings who actually care about the dignity of other human beings. And luckily for everybody living here, we are the majority still. So let's talk about trans issues. Again, it's the volume of bans that's overwhelming, right? People can get caught on one particular thing and think maybe there's a reasonable argument to be made. But when you talk about all of the bans, it's so obvious that this is a political strategy. We have so few trans students to begin with that, like, the fact that this is the focus is really alarming. They're banning schools from protecting kids from bullying. They're banning children from getting health care. Don't bother saying gender affirming health care. You can say supportive health care. You can say the best kind of health care. Nobody knows those words, so I argue not to use them. Gender affirming healthcare is healthcare just like anything else. It's what the doctor would prescribe to your kid. They're threatening doctors with crimes if they provide that healthcare. They are banning trans kids from participating in school sports. We'll talk more about that. They're banning trans adults from getting healthcare. They're banning trans people from all ages from using bathrooms. They're banning trans adults from updating their driver's license. They're making it easier to discriminate. They're banning books. They're mandating the forced outing of youth. So pick a few that get you really outraged and remind people that this is happening everywhere on every level. This is a political strategy. This is not about one community that's identified a problem that needs fixing. This is about a national right-wing strategy. That's about control. Again, this is a couple of good ways of putting the last couple of slides into messaging practice. In the last 5 months alone, 82 laws have been passed across states to ban and restrict trans people and kids. There are 27 federal bans and restrictions under consideration right now. In fact, there are now more laws on the books restricting trans kids from playing sports in schools than there are trans kids playing sports in schools. Like, if you need anything else to tell you that this is not a real concern for people, it's that. There is, in fact, a law in Alabama on the books that applies to one student. The second bullet point goes into that race class narrative a little bit. Just like other parents, just like all parents, right? The parents of trans kids want their kids to learn and grow and play sports if they want to. These politicians have no idea what the parents of trans kids go through to understand, help, and support their children. Just a couple of good ways of starting to talk about that. But we will get into sports more, because if there's a flashpoint to the flashpoint, this is it. The good news is there is a very clear way of handling this conversation. This feels like it might be one of the thorniest and stickiest. In fact, it's one of the ones that has the clearest way through. People need to hear three things. The first thing is a quick reminder that every child's body and athletic potential is different, especially at young ages. Like, we have all known girls who were way taller than many of the boys their age. We don't keep them from playing sports. We've all known boys who took forever to grow as tall as their classmates. They didn't play with the girls' team. Like, we don't do that to kids, right? We don't segment based on how far along in puberty you are. Like, that's just not, every kid's body and athletic potential is different. Sometimes it's important to remind people of that. The second one, there is no scientific evidence that the average trans girl athlete is any bigger, stronger, or faster than the other girls. And that's a really important one, because the opposition is absolutely claiming that being trans is an unfair advantage on a girl's team. And there is no scientific evidence that the average trans girl athlete is any bigger, stronger, or faster than other girls. And if you feel like that doesn't really make sense to me, because if I remember, like even at that age, most of the boys are bigger than most of the girls, so there is something there, right? This is where you need to keep in mind that there are vanishingly few trans girls who are playing in school sports right now. So we're not talking about comparing the average of all trans 15-year-olds to all cis girl 15-year-olds. We're talking about the one girl who wants to play on the field hockey team. And there is absolutely no evidence that that one trans girl who wants to play on the field hockey team is any bigger, stronger, or faster than the other girls. Just like you couldn't pull out any kid in any grade and have a statistical average that they were going to be more athletically powerful. That's just not the way it works. So you're not thinking about all trans girls of that age. You're thinking about Chelsea, who wants to play on the badminton team, who wants to play volleyball. You're thinking about that one girl, and there's no scientific evidence that says she is at any advantage. The third point is one that we shouldn't really have to make, but adults tend to forget it sometimes. School sports is about fun. It's about being healthy and making friends and learning healthy competition, and like, it's a big part of education. It's not really about athletic prowess. At the highest levels of sports, they are having very interesting conversations about athletic potential, but they have to do that all the time. What happens when Michael Phelps's DNA makes him have slightly longer limbs than any other random person, or when Caster Semenya has elevated levels of testosterone without being a trans woman or intersex at all? Like, at that level, there are interesting conversations that happen. We're not talking about that level. We're talking about school. And the point of school sports is to learn competition, make friends, stay healthy, and have fun. So those three things, right? Every kid's body is different. No scientific evidence that that trans girl has any advantage. And the point of all of this is fun. When people hear those three things, it really inoculates everything that the other side is saying. So this is a little bit of fun. The end of the poll, that quantitative piece of it, where they ask you, are you more or less likely to take action now that you've heard all of this? You can see how people moved after hearing the messages that I just showed you. If you look at our primed and ready audience, a 25-point change is enormous. I mean, red, white, and blue gets really big numbers. Like, you all are like responsible for, 10-point swings all the time. So 25 points probably sounds normal to you. It's not. It's very, very good. And similarly, your persuadable activists go up 12 points. Again, that's huge. And if you look at all of the other numbers, we don't really see a backlash here. Like, these messages don't make conservatives that much more likely to turn out. They don't really galvanize the opposition. In fact, if you look at that -12 there, they make the disengaged opposition even less likely to engage. It goes from 12% is likely to 0% is likely to. So what this means is that while you want to talk to people in the primed and ready and persuadable activist categories, if you use these messages in a very wide setting where you're talking to everybody, that's fine. You're not going to do any damage if audiences that are not necessarily the audiences you're trying to reach hear what you're saying. That's not true of all messages. So this is a good one. You can put it on your Facebook page. Doesn't matter who sees it. You're not going to do any damage. In fact, you're going to do a lot of good with the people who want to see it. So our takeaways: we're going to focus on youth impact. We're going to focus on what kids are losing because of these bans: history, well-rounded education, access to books, safety, facing more bullying, mental health issues. We're going to talk about the collective bans. We're not just going to say that bans are happening. We're going to really kind of lay out how many bans, what kinds of bans all over the country, because that helps people understand that this is a political strategy. It is disingenuous. It is a political strategy. And the reason why they are doing that is to control people so that they can stay in power. They want to impose their religious beliefs on everybody. They want to divide people. They want people to look and think like them. Helping people understand the motivation behind this stuff. It's weird when this circus comes to your town, and understanding who's doing it and why really helps you not feel demoralized. Meet parents where they're at. If you're talking to parents, again, don't just talk to parents. Lots of very important people to this movement who are not parents. They just care a lot. Convey hope and empowerment in your communications. This issue can be scary, and acknowledge that people are scared. Acknowledge how difficult it is to be a parent right now. That really helps you meet them where they are and makes them more receptive to hear what else you have to say. As always, the best narrative describes the problem, centers some of the most concerning policies, describes the motivation, meets people where they are, frames kids, highlights safety, and emphasizes a positive call to action around learning and supporting each other. It's about rejecting divisive politicians. It's about supporting our kids and our communities. Fear might spark people to take action, but fear can also just make people put their heads, like, not engage at all. So red, wine, and blue is sort of like the empowerment capital of the political world, as far as I'm concerned. So I know that this is a little bit redundant, but do try to keep it empowering. Do try to remember to emphasize a positive call to action. I lead another Troublemaker training every now and then that's about combating disinformation. So when you see that come in, and you'll get a much deeper dive into this. But one of the tips and tricks that I provide is, when you are confronted with somebody who has heard something, right? First, let's say disinformation is information that somebody knows is false, but they repeat it anyway, right? So picture Tucker Carlson maybe repeatedly saying something that he knows is not true, and we know he knows it's not true. Moms for Liberty knows that taking sex ed out of school makes kids less safe, not more safe, but they keep repeating it anyway. Like, that's disinformation, right? Misinformation is when somebody says something that they think is true, but is not. So if somebody hears the Moms for Liberty stuff and then they repeat it to you, that's misinformation. you need to deal with that. And one of the best ways to do that is to not amplify it, right? We're not going to repeat it. If somebody says to me, and I use this one because it's so ridiculous that I don't think it's going to, it's, don't, you've probably heard the like terrible thing that it was going around Fox News. It was going around TikTok for a while, a couple months ago about there was a rumor about kids identifying as cats, and so schools had to have litter boxes, right? So if somebody comes up to you and saying, I heard that this is happening, you're not actually going to engage with that ridiculous claim. You're not actually going to say you're going to say that's not happening. That's not true. And then you're going to move on to the accurate information, right? We're not going to spend time debating what they want us to debate, because that just gives airtime to the disinformation and means you don't spend your time talking about the things that you actually want to talk about, talking about the benefits of having a good common sense agenda to kids. Every minute that I spend engaging with this question of kids and cats, I'm not talking about keeping kids safe from bullying. I'm not talking about giving them a well-rounded education. And that means the opposition has won. Like, even though they're not in that conversation, they've won because I've spent 5 minutes talking to my friends about kids and cats and whether or not that's real. I've done none of the work that I wanted to do. So that's rule number one. You're going to just really quickly bat stuff down. That's not true. I don't think that's right. There's a lot of bad information out there. These guys say a ton of stuff that isn't real. Whatever language you want to use to knock it to the side and then get to the thing that you want to say. So that's rule number one. Rule number two that Julie was mentioning is finding common ground, right? If somebody comes to you with, I saw this deeply concerning thing on Facebook, it seems like they're showing something very inappropriate to first graders. Before you knock it down and talk about why, accurate information is important in schools and keeps kids healthy and safe, before you do that, you're going to meet their concern, because their concern is probably coming from a real and valid place. In fact, you probably share it, right? If somebody comes to you with that concern, they're saying they care about their kids having good information in schools. They care that their kids are getting age-appropriate lessons. Well, you probably care about that too, right? I care about that. So hear their concern and tell them that you share it. That's why you care so much that the sex ed curriculum has transparent, age-appropriate materials on the site that parents can access whenever they want. You're off to the races. But start by meeting that concern. Even if the concern comes with misinformation, we're not going to address the misinformation. But the concern is real. And if you validate that, people are way more likely to stick around and have the rest of that conversation with you. So just a couple of tips from my other training to help you on your way. Please don't mention Tucker Carlson. I'm sorry.
Okay, I've got questions for
Yes.
you. Someone asked, how is bodily inspection constitutional?
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's right. It's not, obviously, right? Like, we have certain rights to autonomy, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the rest of it. I don't see bodily inspection failing under that. If they did that, it would be challenged in courts, right? Like, if that law gets on the books in Ohio, it will be challenged in courts. This is why state Supreme Court elections are so important, why your judge elections are so important, why the presidential election is so important, because they appoint Supreme Court justices. I don't think that striking down Roe v. Wade was constitutional. But if you have enough right-wing activist judges on the court, it doesn't matter. They'll do it anyway. So the short answer is it's not. The long answer is that's not enough to protect us.
Mm-hmm. So, can you provide places where the bans have happened? Let me
Oh
see
my
what bans
gosh.
we were talking about. I believe it's when you were talking about the book bans, the 1700, I believe.
Yeah, and I think Red, Wine, and Blue actually has, I don't want to not plug a resource that you all have that lists book bans, but they're in Ohio, they're in Pennsylvania, they're in North Carolina, they're in Florida, they're in Oregon. I like, they're in almost every state. It is actually easier to name states
Mhm.
where this is not happening than states where it is. I was recently fighting a book ban in New Jersey, which is not a state that I would expect to be on that list. I did a lot of work in Worcester, Massachusetts. Wouldn't expect Massachusetts to be on that list. So it's incredibly widespread. My guess is like Hawaii is all right. I think New York isn't dealing with it. California is probably not dealing with it. That's good. That's about it.
And I put in the chat to answer that, like, if you have a really interest in like a particular policy, like a particular band, like PEN America and the American Library Association track book bans, or if you want to know what's going on with like anti-trans legislation, I'm sure Human Rights Campaign or like Equality Ohio or those groups, you can go to their websites and I'm sure they all have resources to tell you where this stuff is happening. Or Google or ChatGPT probably.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the 1700 books, or was it 1700 laws, or schools that have banned books? And Julie, I think, answered that one, that it was indeed books. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody saw that. So could you cite the source about trans girls not being stronger or faster than other girls?
Yes, and I think the source is actually in the PowerPoint, but like I want to be clear about the language here, because what I'm saying is there is no scientific evidence that any trans girl athlete, any one trans girl athlete is bigger or stronger than the rest of the girls. I am not saying that the totality of trans girls might not be bigger and stronger than the totality of cis girls. But that is not what we are talking about here. That would mean that every single trans girl wanted to play sports and that there were as many of them as there were cis girls. Neither of those things are true. There are vanishingly small numbers of trans kids playing sports. Like I said, there's a law in Alabama that applies to a single student. So when we are talking about there being scientific evidence that we're talking about one girl. So you can see how, of course, there's no scientific evidence that that one girl who happens to want to play on the volleyball team is any bigger or stronger than the rest of the girls. Does that make sense? It's like it's it's linguistically a little bit tricky because people think that what you're doing is comparing groups, like full group to full group. But it's really important that that's not what we're doing, because we're talking about singling out one kid. So yeah, there's no scientific evidence that the one trans girl who decides she wants to play on the field hockey team is tall. That's just not, you can't have scientific evidence for that. So there you go. I hope that helps.
All right. And then I know Julie's going to send out a follow-up email. And with that, you're getting the slides. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then someone asked if you could share your email again.
Oh, yes. It is jess@coppersky.co. I'll just stick it in the chat.
All right. And then someone asked, how do you guide people into action without them immediately checking out?
Woof. Yeah. I mean, this is the red wine and blue solution right there. One, you're talking to people who already know and trust you, right? You're not just calling strangers on the phone. It is a whole lot easier to get people who know and trust you to engage on an issue. But this is where we have to keep it empowering, you know? We have to talk about like, let's band together to support kids and reject these divisive politicians. They want you demoralized. Like that's the point. So when we spend all of this time, you know, debating the whatever crazy thing we have heard instead of talking about what we want for our kids, that's what keeps it demoralized. I use this piece in my other training, so sorry for those of you who have seen it. But are you all familiar with the change my mind guy? It's an internet meme that goes around. It's a guy sitting at a table in a public park. He's on a folding chair and he's got a sign up and it says something inflammatory, change my mind. You know, the one that I saw was women are bad drivers, change my mind. And the internet regularly serves up this meme when they want to talk about, you know, women debating and stuff like that. So picture this guy and his folding chair and his table with his sign up that says women are bad drivers, change my mind. I could do it Like I could change his, I mean, I could make the case. I can make this case really, really quickly, right? Insurance companies insure drivers, and women are cheaper because we're better drivers. Not because insurance companies are following a woke agenda and they want to like balance the gender scales. It's because we get in fewer accidents because we're better drivers. So there's actually empirical data there that says women are better drivers, and I could annihilate his point in a sentence if I wanted to. But if I sat down to talk to that dude, would it work? Like, no. Because he's not actually trying to debate me. He's trying to waste my time. So recognizing when you see bait like that and just saying that's not true and continuing walking, like that's how you stop the demoralization. Don't and you know, this is happening on Facebook more than it's happening in real life, but like when somebody is baiting you into arguing with them, they're winning. Even if you're winning the argument, they're wasting your time and they're making you mad. Walk away, eat some chocolate, talk to a friend, pour a glass of wine. Like your mental, that this real estate is so much more important. The only time it makes sense to debate somebody whose mind cannot be changed is if there are people watching that you think it's really important to make a couple of clear points in front of. But even then, like I might stop the guy in the park. I might if there was a little crowd around him, I might like wave my hands from the back and be like, hey, insurance companies, give us a deal because we're better drivers. Thanks for listening. And then I'd keep walking, just so all the people around him could have heard that great point. Not because I think I'm going to change his mind with it. So like when you think about demoralization, remember how much of this, how much of the opposition is literally about wasting your time, and don't let it happen. You know, focus on doing things, focus on the people who need it, focus on showing up, focus on your community. Man, stopping demoralization is like, that's like the biggest question right there.
Yeah, and some people are not going to jump to activism right away because it takes multiple conversations. So, you know, Julie got kicked, but she got kicked off her Wi-Fi. There was another question here, and this is kind of a loaded question. So, what the other side is saying, what are they saying on the other side that is so effective that gets people to like believe some of this just kind of really off the wall stuff?
Well, do remember that like a lot of, you know, a lot of the opposition really like, they really want prescriptive gender roles. They really want men to be what they think of as men, and they want women to be what they think of as women, and they really don't want anybody to be able to make a decision that is different from the one that they would make for them, right? A lot of people understand exactly what they're doing and they're for it. They're a minority, right? That's why they have to lie, because they have to trick other people into thinking that they're doing something different, because there aren't enough people who are like, yes, I would like these retrograde policies. I do not think that women should control their own bodies, and I do think that we should be bullying kids at school. There aren't a ton of people who will actually say that. There are more than I would like, but not a ton. So they have to lie about it. So a lot of times there's like a grain, you know, like they'll take something that is part of the sex ed curriculum for late high schoolers and claim that it's happening for second and third graders. That's a big one. A lot of times they will just straight up lie. They will simply say that, you know, they will say that a book contains sexually explicit adult material, and then it turns out that book is, you know, Lord of the Flies, or like one of, you know, it's like a classic book that like everybody reads as a kid, but you know, sometimes books contain thoughts about, you know, lust or you know, puberty, might mention you know, wanting to be alone with somebody, and they'll call that sexually explicit adult material. Like, so lots of it is a huge exaggeration. Lots of it is a straight up lie. A lot of it plays on people's fears if they have them. It's, you know, it's dark. Like they really do sort of see what's going to be, you know, what might appeal to the most scared and angry parts of people, and then they tell them that that part is right, and the reason why they feel that way is because, you know, teachers are teaching kids to be different now than they were. So it's, you know, it's tough. They have to do a lot of work. Like they do have to work overtime to do it. because they can't tell the truth, and in my mind, telling the truth is easier. But I mean, ultimately what they want to do, like, they don't like public education. Like, that's what they're doing. And we've seen their attacks on public education for a very long time. It usually comes in terms of funding. You know, remember No Child Left Behind, like all of the defunding of schools, like they've been going after public education for a very long time. And that's because public education is a huge democratizing force in this country. Like I said, it is where you meet people who aren't like you. It's where you're exposed to different ideas. That's a very good thing. But it's terrible if what you want is a really narrow worldview where your way goes and that's it. You really have to end public education. You need everybody homeschooled or schooled in religious institutions, which is ultimately their goal. That was a very long answer to that question. I'm sorry. They say a lot of things.
But it was a very good answer, Jess. We appreciate it. Well, I think we've gone through the questions in the chat, and Julie is back. Did I miss anything, Julie? I think you're back. Maybe not. I saw her name.
Yes, I'm back. And no,
Oh,
you
okay.
didn't miss anything. That was good.
Okay. All right. Well, I will send the slides and information following up so you can check your inbox for that. And sorry, I'm looking at the chat. I think we're almost at time, so I think we'll go ahead and end it there. But thank you, Jess, for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Everybody
Seriously, thank you all for being here on a Thursday night and like wanting to do this and going out and doing this. Like, you can see from this research that like your conversations will make the difference. And so thank you for being willing to have them.